Howdy. We are talking about one of my favorite topics, legal issues and ethics. Let me give you my sales pitch. Every single one of you, be you in business, the Bush School, you're in engineering and not in computer science, and you don't want to do anything for cybersecurity, you're going to be building bridges, you're going to be designing avionics systems, you're going to be doing whatever other engineers do. In reality, each of you are of a generation that every time you put your fingers on the keyboard, you need to know an ethical and legal framework for many reasons. The internet has no boundaries. I know that sounds crazy, but many of our laws are written for the physical world, and we try to apply them to the electronic world. The analogy I always use is if I walk out and my car is stolen and I know I parked it 2 hours before, there's a certain physical distance that car could be moved. That car can only be stolen once. Right? They may or may not find the perpetrators. When they find the perpetrators, he will be tried under Texas law because the jurisdiction is clearly Texas. And if I say, hey, you know what, in Texas he can only get, I'm just making up numbers, 20 years for stealing my car, and in Louisiana, 40 years, I want him tried under Louisiana law, and they'll be like, no, it was stolen in Texas, right? Where are you getting off? So there's all this stuff, jurisdiction, standing, case and controversy, and all this that I introduce when I do my other courses. I spend a day in the beginning going through. I did not do that for this course, I don't think. Maybe I did. And I can share those videos with you if you'd like. In fact, I will do that. But my point is, if you are a person and you're looking at working the next 5, 10, 20, 30, 40 years, however long, it doesn't matter. Now, as we put our fingers on the keyboard, we live in an international world. That whole physical notion of something being stolen, if it's data, it's across the world in seconds, right? There's all these legal issues, and there's also all these ethical issues. And unfortunately, as much as I love the topic, they wouldn't let me take all semester, or I can't record 20 hours for this topic. Take my law and policy class. I personally feel like it should be required for every engineering student because I don't teach it as the textbook writer. The author of the textbook I use teaches the Naval Academy, and he's teaching his naval cadets to be lawyers. He's making them do issue spotting, stand before a judge, present legal arguments. No, I am teaching you to be legal savvy technology workers, or legal savvy engineers, or computer science, or businesses, and how to analyze. The analysis is important because as the law changes, you can go in and analyze. All right. But the fact of the matter is, every time your finger's on the keyboard, you're at risk. So I'm going to talk about this. Again, I'm using Dr. Conklin's slides. Again, I'm going to give you unabashed that, you take my class. It's going to be offered in class the fall 2018. I was offering it online this summer. I don't like online classes for that as much because, when I teach Foundations of Cybersecurity, which you're in now, I can give you definitive answers. When I'm in law and policy, we really need more discussion because I start out the first day and say, this is a class where the professor does not have all the answers, So we're going to talk about this. What we tend to forget in the United States or overlook is we talk a lot about statutory law, meaning what is in the statutes, the DMCA, the ECPA, Graham Leach Bliley here. By the way, that's Dr. Graham, formerly a professor at Texas A&M University, who later became a senator from Texas. The CFAA, which is one, if you are going to get in trouble with your fingers on the keyboard, you're going to probably get in trouble for their CFAA and DMCA, both of which can have draconian consequences, both of which have created new rights, criminal and civil, prosecution and lawsuits that can occur. But to go back to it, we live in a common law society. So when we talk about statutory law, that's all good, but common law means it comes from the courts. And think about it. If you live in the United States, and sometimes I know this is lost on international students, and I apologize in advance, but think about the biggest overarching consequences in American history have typically come from Supreme Court decisions, and that is basically common law. Supreme Court is the law of the land. Brown v. Board of Education, which repealed an earlier Supreme Court terrible decision, Plessy v. Ferguson. Plessy v. Ferguson said separate but equal. We all knew that wasn't what was happening. Brown v. Board of Education in the early 50s outlawed segregation. Massive changes in this country, right? Massive changes in this country. So when we talk about the common law, we're talking about it's based on previous events or precedents, and it comes from the judicial branch of government. The judge decides the applicability of laws and regulations. Now, all of our criminal law, the statutes, if you're arrested for a crime, you want to be able to find the statute, right? You don't want to know that a judge decided something was a crime. However, things about evidence, all the legal proceedings that surround that criminal action are based on common law. Not all, but a good part of them are based on common law. The judge will rule. The Daubert in the previous lecture, that was a case before the Supreme Court. So we have a lot of common law. We tend to think of the statutes. We need to think of both. Okay? Now, I'm not going to go through all this. I'll talk about it when we get to each of the slides. Quite frankly, like I said, I could lecture on this for 20 hours. I doubt if anyone would be with me. But what I do want to point out to you on this is the difference between laws, CFAA, DMCA, ECPA, GLBA, HIPAA, and all this. They are laws. You can go look at them in the statute. One of the biggest ones I talk about in my law and policy class regarding privacy is the 1974 Privacy Act. Now, it's 1974 originally. It's been updated many times, right? Sarbanes-Oxley is a law. However, I want you to look at PCI DSS because that is, in fact, an industry standard. It's basically contractual rules governing how credit card data is to be protected. Hey, you don't want to abide by the rules? No problem. Because MasterCard, Visa, American Express, Discover Card, all those use the PCI DSS standard. And what they put in the contract are huge fines or damages, let's say. So you don't do this, you not only lose your right to use a credit card, and oh, by the way, you owe us contractual damages, So PCI DSS is an industry standard. I love it. It's not a government standard. It's where the industry said, hey, we're going to get together and we're going to come up with this and we're going to put it throughout the industry. And, God bless you if you can run a business today in 2018 without using a credit card, right? And the fines can be up to $500,000. And like I said, they have the right to say you don't use credit cards anymore. Yeah, you don't use credit cards anymore. Okay, so let's just talk about this. The crime can be, the computer can be the target. The computer can assist in the crime. It can be a mechanism in the crime or incidental, and it's a criminal's point of view. Now, when we talk about cyber crime, let me tell you, if I said list cyber crimes, we could all list 4 or 5. Obviously stealing identities, stealing intellectual property, but then the fact that we are a nation of 50 states, some things are crimes in some states that are not crimes in other states, or some things are misdemeanors in some states that are felonies in other states. And a lot of this is now under the cyber crime. People don't think about this. Cyberbullying, sexting, those can be criminal. And in some states, they can be draconian. You can sext under a certain set of circumstances 2 individuals of a certain age. In some states, it's not a crime. Same ages, same sexes. In another state, you can be a felony and required to register on the sex offender list. So when we talk about cybercrime, this is evolving. There's a sad case out of Missouri some years back, Lori Drew. Lori Drew was an adult. She terrorized and created a fake Facebook page and befriended this girl and made her life, miserable, and made fun of her. And the girl turned out to be a rival of her daughter. I mean, you can't imagine an adult behaving this badly, and the child committed suicide. There was no crime. The Missouri Attorney General bent over backwards trying to figure out how to fit this horrible situation into a crime and could not. Now it's a crime. Cyberbullying is a crime. David's Law in Texas passed just a couple years ago. Before that, cyberbullying was not a crime. And again, a child or a young man was bullied. His parents did everything right. They changed his schools. They changed his phone. It persisted. He committed suicide. And they had the passion and the drive and, quite frankly, the intelligence and the money. And they lobbied the Texas state legislature and had 2 Democrats from his town in San Antonio introduce the law. It passed in a bipartisan legislature in Texas, and it became a crime. So when we talk about cybercrime, there's some things we clearly know, and now we are evolving this criminal law. Let me see. Why is this not moving down? Here we go. So he makes this differentiation of if the computer's the target, if it's a mechanism, if it's incidental, something like child pornography. By the way, if I will start my lectures in my other class and for law and policy, and I always start the first day of what has legal definitions, statutory legal definitions, and confidentiality, integrity, availability do. Computer does, and if you read the definition and you're a computer scientist, you kind of laugh at it, but there are court cases that say CFAA, it has to be on a computer. Was this a computer? Yes, it was a smartphone, and it did this and this and this and this and this, according to this archaic definition of computers that probably came out of a 1960 or 1970 textbook, and therefore it's under the CFAA. A case that proved it. One of them, again, was a child sexting case, rising almost to the level of pornography, but not quite. They couldn't prosecute this individual, and they finally got him under CFAA and actually lowered the standard of what constituted a crime. And lowering the standard means you had to do much less to be charged with a crime until state laws could pass. So, you get all this, a Nigerian prince scheme, all of this kind of stuff. So here it is, statutory law passed by a legislative branch, and it can be Congress, local city government, the state, whatever. And then you have agencies that take USC, U.S. Code, and then create CFR, Code of Federal Regulations, and this is administrative law. So you basically have the sources of law. Some are statutory, where we voted these people in, and others are government agencies, EPA, FAA, FCC. SEC is big now in cybersecurity regulation and the power to fine and do all this. We didn't vote these people in, but they basically took U.S. law and interpreted it and created their own set of regulations. Then we talk about common law, case law, what I've talked about. It comes from the judicial branch. And so again, as I said in the beginning, CFAA, DMCA, HIPAA, all this are statutory law, but we also have common or case law. And a lot of times the common law, case law, in the case of Lori Drew, what they attempted to do was take an existing law and get a judicial opinion that her bad behavior came under another law. So it's a law interpretation. There's an executive order signed by President Obama on protecting our critical infrastructure. And one statement always stands out to me, in that it says words to the effect, we don't need more legislation. We need to interpret existing laws in view of cybersecurity. So CFAA is one you should know about. If you don't know the story of Aaron Swartz, Google it. He was arrested under the CFAA. To my opinion, it was a clear case of federal prosecutorial overreach. Mr. Schwartz posthumously was put in like the Internet Hall of Fame or whatever. He was a very well-known and respected young man in this area. But his dealings under the CFAA resulted in his committing suicide. Computer trespass is like any other trespass, physical trespass. I pass some kind of border. But the problem with this is, again, those borders are kind of fluid. So he mentions here Canada, US, and the EU. Now these are at fourth edition slides. I don't know what the fifth edition book that's just coming out, but if you take my computer security class, we spend a lot of time, and you should be, even if you don't take my class, looking at GDPR, General Data Protection Regulation, recently passed by the EU. So when we talk about national laws against computer trespass or anything else, privacy, security, That's where these whole notions of boundaries and jurisdictions come in. Extraterritorial jurisdiction means jurisdiction beyond your physical boundaries. It gives the United States the right to have crimes that may occur in other countries against U.S. citizens or legal residents and call those people under our code. Same thing now with the EU. So we have a convention. I really don't follow this. This is terrible maybe, but I follow the U.S. courts. We're in the United States. I probably read, 3 to 5 blogs a day on what's coming out in the courts. The convention's all well and good, but unless it's a treaty, we don't follow that. There is a treaty passed in 2001, and I guest lectured somebody's class, and I hadn't really ever looked at it, and there was 9 articles. I'm trying to remember the name of the treaty on cybersecurity, and then I realized one was about child porn, and it directly conflicts with a Supreme Court decision. As visceral reaction you may have of this, the Supreme Court has ruled that if you produce child pornography without involving human being children, in other words, all through computer-generated animation, that may exactly resemble a child to the point that a viewer may not know the difference if it's a real child or not. But if you produce that and you did not involve children, that is protected First Amendment speech in the United States. And it directly conflicted with this treaty. So when we talk about conventions and treaties, great. Let's all sit around the table, hold hands, and sing Kumbaya. But at the end of the day, if you're in the United States, you're going to be brought under U.S. law. Quite frankly, we violate treaties all the time. There was a vicious murder in Houston some years back in the 90s. I'm trying to remember the name of the victims. Went all the way to Supreme Court because one of the gang members that was accused of kidnapping and eventually murdering these 2 young women was born in Mexico but had been brought to this country as a baby, like a few months old. But we have a treaty that says you have the right to contact your consulate if you are arrested. And the last-ditch effort to prevent him from the death penalty was he was not allowed to, he was not advised or to contact the Mexican consulate. Now, on the surface, we can say, well, that's ridiculous because he was a baby when he was brought in and da-da-da-da-da-da-da. But we have to remember, legal is process. So this was a last-ditch effort to save him. And we do have a treaty that we signed that I think it's a Vienna Accord. And the president at that time was President George Bush, who was former governor of Texas. And he said to Texas, hey guys, you got to abide by this treaty. And our Texas Court of Criminal Appeals, which is the Supreme Court for Texas for criminal, it's kind of misnamed. It sounds like it's an appellate court. It's a Texas Court of Criminal Appeals, basically said, hey, guess what? We are Texas. We did not sign that treaty and allowed this man to be executed. Again, you can argue it both ways. You cannot argue on the heinous nature of his crime. You have to look at the legal process. So again, I hate to sound, but if you're in the United States, I focus on U.S. law. The treaties, the conventions, everything's great and wonderful. It just doesn't always work, okay? So I'm going to go through these quickly because this is not a law and policy class. And I would disagree with maybe a little bit of his order, and I would add some things to the slides, which I have not done. But I want you to get this feeling. This is where law is reactive. We have tried to put laws into effect to better control, manage technology in civil and criminal affairs. But the law is always reactive. Technology changes, and then we come up with a law. So the ECPA is one of these. It's the Stored Communications Act. It prohibited employees monitoring certain things and the like. It was an attempt to preserve privacy. And I can't get off too much on the whole notion of privacy, or as I said, this will be a 20-hour video. I think a more important law for you to know as a practitioner is the CFAA. Because it's like I said, judicial overreach in the case of Aaron Swartz. It's been amended. There's actually proposed changes to it now. This law outlaws something called hacking back or active defense, which is a euphemism for I think I'm being hacked, so I'm going to go after that person offensively. And so you need to know about that. But you need to know about this because it's considered a government crime or one used in interstate commerce, which is like almost any crime, right? Because, almost any computer, right? Because your computer uses the internet. So that's clearly federal jurisdiction. It sets, as it says, financial thresholds, makes it a crime to knowingly transmit computer code or command. It's very wide sweeping. And you have to prove a case. I believe it creates, I know it's criminal. I believe you can also bring civil actions with a lower evidence standard. I may be wrong about that. You still have to prove the case, but it's very wide sweeping. And sometimes it's totally misused. This one I don't talk about much in my, if at all, my law and policy class. It's on the Spam Act, try to regulate emails and the like. Let's leave that with video 1. Let's move on to video 2.